The entire history of United Kingdom. The fire swallowed London as the river turned black. People screamed in the streets. The sky burned orange. Wooden houses collapsed like dry leaves. Bells rang until they melted. In one night, the greatest city in England nearly vanished. And as flames climbed higher than church towers, a single question hung in the smoke. Was this the end of Britain, or the moment it was reborn? The fire kept moving. The wind pushed it forward, and London ran out of places to run. Long before the fire, before kings and crowns, before the word England even existed, this island was cold and wild. Thousands of years ago, thick forests covered the land. Rivers twisted through mud and stone. Small groups of people hunted deer and gathered berries. They left no books, no names, only tools of stone and bone buried deep in the earth. Then came strangers. They crossed from the mainland when the sea was lower. They brought new ideas, new tools. They raised giant stones into the sky, circles that still stand today. No one knows exactly why they built them. No one knows how they moved them. Stonehenge rose silently on the plain. It asked questions but gave no answers. Even now, it watches. Time moved forward. New people arrived again and again. Celtic tribes spread across the land. They spoke different languages but shared the same fear of invasion. They lived in hill forts. They fought with iron weapons. They worshipped nature and honored brave warriors. Then one day, the ground shook under marching feet. The Romans had come. Their ships filled the horizon. Their armor flashed in the sun. They did not ask to enter. They took. Roads cut through forests. Cities rose where villages once stood. Walls wrapped around towns. Bathhouses steamed in the cold air. For the first time, Britain was tied to a massive empire far away. London was born, not as a capital, not as a dream, but as a trading post beside a river. The Romans called it Londinium, and for centuries it grew. But empires do not last forever. When Rome began to fall, its soldiers left. Its power drained away. Britain was left behind, exposed and unprotected. That was when the next wave arrived. Angles, Saxons, Jutes. Their long boats cut through the mist. They burned villages. They pushed inland. The old Roman cities emptied. Roads cracked. Knowledge faded. New kingdoms formed from chaos. Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria. They fought each other. They fought invaders. They fought for land, faith, and survival. Out of this violence, a new identity slowly formed. England. But peace never lasted long. From the cold north came a new terror. Vikings. They struck without warning. Monasteries burned. Gold vanished. Kings fell. One man stood against them. Alfred of Wessex. He hid in marshes. He rebuilt armies. He learned from defeat. And when the moment came, he fought back. England survived. Barely. Yet even victory came with a price. The land was divided. Power was fragile. And across the sea, another threat was already watching. In 1066, the sky filled with arrows. The Battle of Hastings changed everything. An English king fell. A Norman duke rose. William the Conqueror took the crown. Castles spread across the land like scars. French words entered English mouths. Old rulers were replaced. England was no longer just England. It was part of something bigger and more dangerous. Generations passed. Kings ruled and failed. Some were strong. Many were cruel. One king demanded everything. John. He lost wars. He raised taxes. He angered nobles beyond repair. They cornered him beside a river. There, with shaking hands, he sealed a document that said even a king must obey the law. Magna Carta. A small piece of paper. A massive idea. Power was no longer absolute. But power never gives up easily. Plagues followed. The Black Death crept through towns and villages. Streets filled with silence. Nearly half the people were gone. Fields were empty. The world felt broken. Yet from the loss came change. Workers demanded fair pay. Old systems cracked. Society shifted. England was changing again. Then came blood. 2 houses. 1 crown. The Wars of the Roses turned brother against brother. Kings rose and fell in weeks. Heads rolled. Trust vanished. From the chaos came a new dynasty. The Tudors. Henry VIII wanted a son. He wanted power. He wanted control. When the church refused him, he broke away from Rome itself. Monasteries were destroyed. Faith split the nation. Blood followed belief. England became Protestant. Or else. His daughter Mary burned enemies. His daughter Elizabeth ruled with fear and brilliance. Under her, England faced its greatest threat yet, the Spanish Armada. Storms and ships clashed. England survived against all odds. A small island had beaten a giant empire. The world took notice. England looked outward. Ships crossed oceans. Flags were planted. Trade became conquest. Wealth poured in. So did guilt. So did conflict. Then everything broke. A king fought his own people. Charles I lost his crown and his head. For the first time, England had no king. A republic was born in blood. It did not last. The crown returned, but nothing was the same. Then came the night. September 1666. A spark in a bakery. A city of wood. A river of wind. London burned. For days. Endless fire. Thousands homeless. History turned to ash. As flames died, people stood in ruins and wondered, had God punished them? Or had something new begun? Because beneath the ashes, plans were already forming. Streets would be wider. Buildings stronger. London would rise again. But far beyond the smoke, across the seas and deep inside the empire, another storm was growing. One that would shake Britain to its core. And this time, fire would not be enough to stop it. London rose from the ashes, but the fire had changed it. Stone replaced wood. Rules were written where chaos once ruled. The city looked stronger, but under the clean walls and fresh roads, fear still lived. People remembered how fast everything could burn. And beyond London, Britain itself was stretching, growing larger, richer, and more divided than ever before. The island was no longer just surviving. It was expanding. Ships filled the ports. Sailors whispered of lands beyond the horizon, places with gold, spices, sugar, and people who spoke languages no English ear had ever heard. The ocean was no longer a wall. It was a road. Britain followed it. Colonies formed across distant shores. Trade flowed back into British hands. Wealth built grand homes and powered factories. The empire grew piece by piece, map by map. But every gain came at a cost. Far away, labor was forced. Cultures were broken. Lives were controlled by people who would never see the faces they ruled. At home, few asked how the wealth was made. They only saw the results. Then came the machines. Iron gears turned. The Industrial Revolution changed Britain faster than any army ever could. Children worked long hours. Cities swelled. Smoke darkened the sky. Britain became the workshop of the world. But progress did not mean peace. Workers lived crowded and poor. Food was scarce. Disease spread quickly. Wealth stacked high in the hands of a few, while many struggled just to survive. The question began to grow louder. Who was Britain really being built for? Across the sea, that question exploded into rebellion. In the American colonies, British rule was challenged. Taxes were rejected. Voices rose. Then came war. Britain lost. For the first time, a colony broke free. The shock ran deep. If America could leave, who else might follow? Britain turned its eyes elsewhere. India. Trade became control. Control became rule. The East India Company grew into a power larger than nations. Millions lived under decisions made thousands of miles away. The empire was vast now, but it was fragile. Back home, the crown changed again. Kings aged. Queens rose. Parliament grew stronger. Power slowly shifted away from the throne and toward elected voices, but not everyone was allowed to speak. Votes were limited. Rights were uneven. Pressure built like steam in a sealed engine. Something had to give. Then came the wars with France. Napoleon rose like a storm across Europe. Britain stood alone at times, guarding its island with ships and courage. At Trafalgar, the navy triumphed. At Waterloo, the war ended. Britain stood victorious. The empire reached its peak. But victory did not bring rest. The 1800s were an age of contradictions. Britain banned the slave trade, then slavery itself. Factories grew richer. Workers demanded rights. Women demanded voices. Ireland demanded freedom. And Ireland paid a terrible price. The Great Famine struck. Crops failed. People starved. Ships still carried food away while families collapsed in silence. Anger spread. Trust was broken. The union between Britain and Ireland was scarred forever. As the century closed, Britain stood tall on the world stage, but cracks were everywhere. Rivals were rising. Colonies were restless. Technology made war faster and deadlier. Then, in 1914, a single gunshot far away pulled Britain into a conflict no one could control. World War I. Mud-filled trenches. Endless artillery. A generation lost. Britain survived, but at a terrible cost. The empire weakened. The people mourned. And peace did not last. Only 2 decades later, darkness returned. World War II. Bombs fell on London. Children were sent away. The sky burned again. Britain stood alone once more, this time against tyranny that threatened the entire world. Factories turned to weapons. Voices carried hope through radio waves. The island endured. Victory came, but the empire did not return. After the war, Britain changed faster than ever before. Colonies gained independence. The empire faded. A new Britain emerged, smaller, but different. The welfare state was born. Healthcare became a right. Society rebuilt itself from loss. Yet questions never stopped. Who are we now? What does it mean to be British without an empire? The answers were not clear. Immigration reshaped cities. Traditions met new cultures. Debates grew louder. Then came a choice. Europe or independence? Unity or separation? A vote split the nation in two. Brexit. Britain stepped into the unknown once again. From stone circles to burning cities. From kings to parliaments. From empire to uncertainty. Britain had never stopped changing. And as history shows, every time this island thought it had reached the end of its story, another chapter was already beginning. But what happens when a nation shaped by the past must face a future it can no longer control? That answer is still being written. The world after the wars did not feel like victory. Britain stood quiet, tired, and changed. Streets were rebuilt, but memories were harder to repair. Men returned home older than their years. Women who had kept factories alive were asked to step back into smaller roles. Ration cards ruled daily life. Even bread felt precious. The empire was gone in spirit, even if maps still pretended otherwise. And for the first time in centuries, Britain had to learn how to live without ruling others. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, flags were coming down. India left first. In 1947, after years of pressure, protest, and sacrifice, Britain stepped away from the jewel of its empire. The exit was fast and painful. Borders were drawn in haste. Millions were displaced. Violence followed. Britain watched from afar as the cost of empire became impossible to ignore. Other colonies followed. One by one, nations chose their own paths. Britain was no longer the center of the world. It was just one country among many. At home, something new was being built. The government made a promise. No one would be left behind again. Hospitals opened their doors to all. The National Health Service was born. For the first time, care was free at the point of use. Lives were saved. Hope returned. Homes were built. Schools expanded. A safety net formed beneath society. But progress came with pressure. Money was tight. Industries were old. The world was changing faster than Britain could keep up. Then came the Cold War. The threat was no longer armies marching across fields, but missiles hidden underground. Britain stood with the West, tied closely to the United States. Nuclear weapons were built. Bases were formed. Fear lived quietly in the background. Children practiced drills. Adults pretended not to think about the end. In the 1950s and 60s, Britain began to look different. Ships arrived from the Caribbean. Families came from South Asia. Workers arrived from Africa. They were invited to rebuild the nation, and they did. They drove buses, worked hospitals, built homes. But welcome did not always mean acceptance. Racism followed them. Violence followed them. Britain struggled to understand what it was becoming. Music changed everything. Voices rose from the streets. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones. Culture exploded outward. For the first time in generations, Britain exported ideas, not armies. Young people questioned authority. Old rules felt heavy. The world felt wide open. But unity was fragile. Northern Ireland burned. Old wounds reopened. Protests became riots. Bombs shattered cities. Families lived with fear again. The conflict was long, painful, and personal. Peace would take decades. By the 1970s, Britain was struggling. Factories closed. Strikes stopped cities. Power cuts darkened homes. Confidence collapsed. Many wondered if the country had lost its way. Then came a sharp turn. A new leader. A new voice. Margaret Thatcher. She promised strength, order, and change. Industries were sold. Unions weakened. Markets freed. Some grew rich. Others lost everything. Communities broke apart. The nation argued with itself. In 1982, war returned briefly. The Falklands, a distant conflict that stirred deep pride. Britain fought. Britain won. For a moment, the old confidence returned. But it did not last. The Cold War ended. Walls fell. Enemies changed. Britain entered Europe more deeply, tying its future to neighbors it once fought. Peace felt possible, permanent. But history had other plans. As the new century approached, Britain stood balanced between past and future. Strong, but uncertain. United, but divided. Proud, but questioning. And then, without warning, the world changed again. Because the next threat would not come by ship or by army, but through fear itself. The new century did not arrive quietly. It arrived with speed, screens, and shadows. Britain stepped into the 2000s believing the worst was behind it. Wars were far away. Peace felt normal. London was a global city, alive day and night. Money moved fast. Ideas moved faster. Then came a morning that changed everything. Planes hit towers in New York. The world watched in shock. And Britain knew it would not stand aside. The War on Terror began. British soldiers were sent overseas once more. Afghanistan, Iraq, deserts replaced green fields. Promises were made about safety, freedom, and a better future. But the wars were long, confusing, costly. Lives were lost. Questions grew louder. Why were they there? What had been achieved? Trust began to crack. At home, fear took a new shape. Surveillance increased. Laws tightened. Security became part of daily life. Then, in July 2005, terror came to London itself. Bombs on buses, bombs on trains. Ordinary people, ordinary mornings, shattered. The city stopped. Then it stood up again. Quietly. Together. Britain changed again. Immigration rose. Cities grew younger. Voices multiplied. Languages mixed. Some welcomed it. Others feared it. The question returned, louder than ever. What does it mean to be British? The economy seemed strong. Banks grew huge. Money flowed. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. In 2008, the system broke. Banks collapsed. Jobs vanished. Homes were lost. The government stepped in to save what it could. Ordinary people paid the price. Anger spread. Faith in leaders faded. Austerity followed. Budgets were cut. Services shrank. Communities felt the strain. The rich survived. The poor struggled. The gap widened. Old wounds reopened. Then came the vote that split the nation. Brexit. A simple question with no simple answer. Leave or remain. Families argued. Friends stopped talking. Cities voted one way. Towns another. In 2016, Britain chose to leave the European Union. Cheers filled some streets. Silence filled others. No one knew what would come next. Years of debate followed. Delays. Deals. Broken promises. Leaders fell. Trust fell with them. Britain felt stuck between what it was and what it wanted to be. Then the world stopped. A virus spread. Streets emptied. Doors closed. People stayed apart. Hospitals filled. Lives were lost. Claps echoed from windows at night. Hope came in small acts. Science raced forward. Vaccines arrived. Slowly, the world reopened. But nothing felt the same. A queen who had ruled through war, peace, empire, and decline was gone. Elizabeth II died. A chapter closed. A nation paused. A new king took the throne. History turned another page. Now Britain stands again at a crossroads. No empire. No certainty. But still standing. Still changing. Still searching for its place in a world it once ruled. The story is not over. Because what Britain becomes next will be written by those living it now. The past never truly leaves Britain. It waits, hidden in stone walls, old laws, broken promises, and memories passed quietly from one generation to the next. As the modern age moved forward, Britain carried centuries of weight on its shoulders. And now, that weight was beginning to press back. The nation looked united on maps. But inside, cracks were growing. Scotland questioned the Union. Wales searched for a stronger voice. Northern Ireland lived carefully between peace and tension. England, the largest part, struggled to understand itself without empire, without Europe, without clear direction. The United Kingdom was one country, but many stories. Scotland remembered. It remembered kings lost at Culloden. It remembered treaties signed and power taken. It remembered promises made long ago. In 2014, Scotland voted on independence. The result was close. Too close to forget. The Union survived, but trust weakened. The question did not die. It only went quiet. Northern Ireland lived with ghosts. Peace had come, but it was fragile. Borders mattered there. Identity mattered. Brexit reopened old fears. Lines once erased returned to minds. People worried that history might repeat itself, that silence might break. In England, power felt distant. Many felt unheard. Small towns felt forgotten. Cities grew richer. Rural places fell behind. The divide was not loud, but it was deep. And anger grew slowly, quietly. Technology changed everything. Phones replaced newspapers. Social media replaced debate. Truth blurred. Lies traveled fast. Old fears found new voices. History was argued, rewritten, shouted over. Statues were questioned. Names were challenged. The past was no longer safe. Britain looked back at its empire, at what it took, at what it broke, at what it left behind. Some defended it. Others demanded truth. Museums changed. Schools argued. The nation wrestled with its own reflection. Was Britain a builder or a destroyer? The answer was never simple. Then came new leaders, new promises, new failures. Trust fell lower. People stopped believing words. They watched actions instead, and they did not like what they saw. The monarchy stood quietly above it all, a symbol, a tradition, a reminder of continuity. But even the crown felt fragile now. Younger generations questioned it. Older ones held tighter. The royal family became human, too human. Mistakes were seen. Cracks showed. Mystery faded. Yet Britain endured, because it always had. Through plague, fire, war, collapse, reinvention, the island had survived invasions, revolutions, and world wars. It adapted, again and again, but this time felt different, because the enemy was not outside. It was uncertainty itself. The future pressed closer. Climate change, migration, technology, a shifting world order. Britain was no longer the leader, not the center, not the voice that decided. It had to listen now, to others, to itself. And as the old stories faded, a new one began to form. One that would decide whether the United Kingdom remained united or slowly came apart. Because the next chapter of Britain's history would not be written by kings or empires, but by choice. Choice is powerful and dangerous, because once a choice is made, there is no return to what was before. Britain was learning that lesson again. The years moved fast. Governments changed. Promises repeated. But life on the ground felt slower. Bills rose. Homes became harder to afford. Young people wondered if the future even had space for them. Older generations worried about what they would leave behind. Hope felt thinner than it once did. Scotland watched closely. Brexit had changed everything. Scotland had voted to stay in Europe, but it was pulled out anyway. The old question returned, louder and sharper. Who decides Scotland's future? Voices rose. Marches filled streets. Flags waved again, not in anger, but in resolve. The Union stood, but the ground beneath it shifted. Wales followed its own path. Culture strengthened. Language returned. Pride grew quietly, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. A nation rediscovering itself. Northern Ireland stood on a fragile line. Trade borders. Political deadlock. Old fears whispered again. Peace remained, but only because people protected it every day. History waited nearby, watching. England felt the weight of leadership, but also confusion. Who was England now? A nation of villages and fields? Of global cities? Of tradition or change? The question had no single answer, and that made many uncomfortable. The world beyond Britain was changing faster. New powers rose. Old alliances weakened. Technology reshaped work, war, and truth. Britain adapted, but not easily. It was no longer shaping the world. It was reacting to it. Then came moments that reminded everyone of fragility. Storms flooded towns. Heat cracked roads. Nature spoke louder. History was no longer just behind Britain. It was catching up. The crown remained, a symbol older than most nations. But symbols need belief. And belief was changing. Some saw stability. Others saw the past holding on. The monarchy survived, but under watchful eyes. And still, daily life continued. Children went to school. Workers caught trains. Families gathered. Britain did what it always did. It carried on. Because beneath all the noise, all the debate, all the doubt, there was something deeper. A shared memory of survival. A quiet strength built over centuries. From stone circles to steel cities. From tribes to kingdoms. From empire to uncertainty. The United Kingdom had been many things. A conqueror. A builder. A protector. A breaker. A home. And now, it faced its hardest role yet. To become something new, without losing itself. Because the final chapter of Britain's story was no longer about power, or empire, or dominance. It was about identity, and whether four nations could still walk forward, together. The future does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives quietly. While people are busy arguing about the past, Britain entered its newest chapter without ceremony, without certainty, and without a clear map forward. The island that once ruled oceans now watched the tide instead of commanding it. And for the first time in its long history, Britain faced a question it could not conquer. Who are we now? The United Kingdom was born from force, fear, and agreement. England and Scotland, once enemies, tied together by treaty. Wales absorbed slowly, its voice softened but never erased. Ireland split by history, blood, and borders. What held them together was power, then empire, then habit. Now, only choice remained. Daily life continued, but beneath it all, pressure built. Cities grew taller. Villages grew quieter. Young people felt priced out of the future. Older generations felt the world moving too fast. The gap between memory and reality widened. Britain had always balanced tradition and change. Now the balance shook. The economy no longer looked like it once did. Coal was gone. Steel faded. Factories became warehouses. Warehouses became data centers. Britain no longer made the world's machines. It managed systems instead. Numbers replaced hands. Screens replaced tools. Some adapted. Others were left behind. And resentment followed. London remained powerful. A city larger than the country around it. Money flowed through it. Ideas passed through it. But many felt London was no longer Britain. It was something else. A global island inside an island. The divide grew sharper. Scotland waited. It watched carefully. Every decision from Westminster. Every shift in power. Every broken promise. Independence was no longer a dream whispered. It was a plan debated. Measured. Prepared. The Union felt strong on paper. But paper tears easily. Northern Ireland lived with constant awareness. Peace was not automatic. It was work. Daily work. Borders mattered there. Words mattered. Silence mattered. Brexit tested that peace. And everyone knew it. History did not need to repeat itself. But it always waited for weakness. Wales found strength in culture. In language. In memory. Not loudly. But firmly. It did not demand separation. It demanded respect. And that demand could no longer be ignored. The monarchy stood at the center. Older than democracy. Older than parliament. A symbol of continuity. But symbols age. And belief changes. Younger generations questioned why power should pass by blood. Older generations remembered what stability felt like. The crown remained. But it was no longer untouchable. Britain's past followed it everywhere. In museums. In streets named after generals. In statues questioned. In stories retold. Empire could no longer be celebrated without consequence. Nor erased without honesty. The country argued with itself. Not about facts. But about meaning. Climate change pressed closer. Storms battered coasts. Floods swallowed towns. Heat cracked fields. Nature did not care about history. Or politics. Or borders. Britain, once a master of land and sea, now adapted to forces it could not command. Technology reshaped life again. Artificial intelligence. Automation. Surveillance. Opportunity and fear grew side by side. The same tools that connected Britain to the world also exposed it. Truth became fragile. Trust became rare. And yet, Britain endured. Because it always had. It survived Roman collapse. Viking fire. Norman rule. Plague. Civil war. Revolution. Empire. Decline. Each time, it changed. Not quickly. Not cleanly. But completely. The story of the United Kingdom was never about perfection. It was about survival through contradiction. A nation built on invasion that became a refuge. An empire that preached order while spreading chaos. A kingdom that lost power but gained reflection. Now, Britain stands again at the edge of history. Not with swords. Not with ships. But with choices. About unity. About identity. About truth. The question is no longer whether Britain can rule the world. That story is finished. The real question is harder. Can Britain live honestly with its past and still build a future together? Because the final chapter of the United Kingdom is not written yet. And this time, there is no empire to hide behind. History does not end. It slows. It bends. It waits for people to decide what comes next. And now, the United Kingdom stood inside that pause. Britain had always been good at telling stories about itself. Stories of kings and queens. Stories of victory and survival. Stories of standing alone. But the newest story was harder to tell, because it had no clear hero, no clear enemy, only consequences. For centuries, power had flowed outward from these islands. Orders crossed oceans. Borders were drawn far away. Decisions made in London shaped lives and lands Britain never fully understood. Now the power flowed inward. Questions came home, and they could not be ignored. Children in classrooms learned a different history than their grandparents. Not just glory, but cost. Not just victory, but suffering. The empire was no longer a distant achievement. It was a shared responsibility. Some resisted this. Others demanded it. The argument was not about facts. It was about identity. Britain had always been many nations. But now, those nations spoke louder. Scotland debated independence not as rebellion, but as choice. Wales strengthened its voice without demanding separation. Northern Ireland balanced peace like fragile glass. England searched for itself, unsure whether it was a leader or just the largest part. The Union survived, but survival was no longer enough. Politics grew louder, more divided, less trusted. Leaders came and went. Promises sounded familiar. Hope felt recycled. People voted not for dreams, but against fear. The system still worked, but belief in it weakened. The streets told a clearer story. Food banks multiplied. Housing costs rose. Work became unstable. Some thrived in the new economy. Many did not. Britain had wealth, but it was uneven. And uneven wealth always creates tension. London continued to shine. A global city, a magnet for talent and money. But outside it, many felt forgotten. The island felt smaller. The distance felt larger. Britain's role in the world changed again. No longer a commander, no longer a referee, but a participant, sometimes respected, sometimes ignored, sometimes nostalgic for a time that could not return. Allies mattered more now, but alliances required compromise, and Britain struggled with compromise. The military remained professional, respected, but no longer central to identity. Wars were not celebrated. They were questioned, and that was new. Culture carried Britain forward. Music, film, literature, sport, ideas still traveled far. Britain's voice no longer shouted. It influenced quietly. Soft power replaced force. Not by design, by necessity. The monarchy continued. Ceremonies, crowns, tradition, but it stood under brighter lights. More questions, more scrutiny. The crown was no longer untouchable. It had to justify itself, like everything else. Then came moments that reminded Britain of its shared humanity. Crises, storms, loss, celebration. Moments when flags mattered less than people. In those moments, division faded. Briefly, but meaningfully. Britain was learning something difficult. That strength did not always mean control. That pride did not require denial. That identity could evolve without disappearing. The island had been reshaped many times before. By Romans, by Vikings, by Normans, by kings and parliaments, by industry and war, by empire and decline. Each time, Britain survived by changing. This moment was no different, only quieter. The future of the United Kingdom would not be decided in one vote, or one speech, or one crisis. It would be decided slowly, in classrooms, in homes, in conversations, in choices about fairness, truth, and belonging. Because the real story of Britain was never its power. It was its ability to endure contradiction, to argue, to doubt, to adapt. The empire is gone. The certainty is gone. But the people remain. And as long as they remain willing to face the past honestly, there is still a future to write. Not as rulers of the world, but as a nation that finally understands itself. The history of the United Kingdom is not finished. It is simply waiting. Waiting for the next generation to decide what kind of country this island will become.